Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of AutoCentral, South Africa's #1 motoring podcast. My name is George Mienie, and as usual, joined by none other than the Wandile Sishi. How's it, Wandi?
Not too bad, not too bad. It's another week, so super excited.
Super excited. Isn't it the Bahrain race at the time of this recording coming this weekend?
Close. It's the Belgium.
Belgium
Grand
Bahrain.
Prix.
I thought it was something with a B.
That one over there. It's actually one of my favorite tracks, so super excited.
One of your favorite tracks?
Super.
Oh, why is it your favorite track? Because it's fast and Mercedes will win.
It's super fast. It's super interesting.
Because we all know if Mercedes can't corner, right?
It can't corner, but we don't have to here. There's lots of straights, so I think we'll be okay. I think we'll be just fine this week. But we shall see.
You know what? Hamilton should have gone to, he should have been a drag strip racer.
Yeah, but then he wouldn't have 7, championships. He wouldn't be the best in the world ever.
Because drag racers don't have to turn corners.
But he's the best at turning corners. Hence the 7 titles, George. Come on.
No, it's because most of the tracks have got more straights than corners, right?
We don't make the rules. We just follow them.
Exactly. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, getting right into it. This episode, we are coining the Future Legends episode, and we'll unpack which cars are going to potentially be future classics. And then next, we'll be joined by none other than Chad Lückhoff, our expert journalist, to unpack the contender for a future classic potentially, which is the 2021 Ford Mustang Mach 1. And if you don't know, the Ford Mustang, in its heyday back in the 1960s, has become a classic. And then lastly, as usual, we'll be answering your questions via our Ask AutoTrader platform. So, Wandi, getting right into it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely an interesting show today. And if you think you have some classics which we may have missed, please don't forget to just comment, like the show, tell us what you think, and don't forget to just subscribe and hit the bell icon so you know when the show comes out.
Definitely smash the bell icon so you know when we do one of these. So, the Future Classics episode. And let's try and guess which cars, this is going to be a total guess, which cars are going to be future classics. So, what are some of the future classics you can think of and have made an impression in your life, Wandi?
Well, there's the Lamborghini Countach for me will always be a classic. I'm so excited that Lamborghini just released a sort of a homage or a reimagining of it. It's the first poster car for a lot of people. So I think it's always going to be a classic in a lot of people's hearts. And because I'm biased, of course, I have to include every single BMW in my list of future classics. I don't know what you think what are classics to you, George?
Definitely not a BMW 316i.
Depends who you ask. I think all of them. Every single BMW. I'm biased.
I mean, for me, I think the last of the V8s. That's what I keep calling them. Yeah. The last of the V8s. Those really the muscle cars that are currently rolling off the production floors. Those ones that are going to be the last ones produced. I'm thinking of the SUV, the SRT8. I used to have one.
Yeah.
The SRT, the sedan version. I think they also came in the Chrysler. I'm not sure. But the last of the V8s, I think, are going to become classic cars, and for me that's exciting because the muscle car like the Ford Mustang, which was a V8, became a classic. So not because it's a V8, I think it was just made popular by movies, but I think the last of the V8s for me.
Definitely. What defines a classic car? Can we just kind of set the stage here of what a classic car is, just so everyone's on the same page?
Well, I mean, typically, and I suppose in terms of Wikipedia's definition, a classic car is older than about 20 years. The definitions definitely vary across the board. The common theme of an older car of sufficient historical interest to be a collectible and worth preserving or restoring rather than scrapping. So that's the definition of a classic car. It's worth preserving. Yeah. Classic cars apparently are a subset of the broader category of collector cars.
Okay. So that's kind of setting the stage. It needs to be either sought after, potentially a collectible vehicle, which a lot of people will kind of have high demand for. in the future.
Yeah,
and helps if they're old.
And there's another subset of classic cars called antique cars, because antique cars manufactured before 1980, and then vintage cars is another category which is manufactured pre-World War II.
Okay.
So, classic the Classic Car Club of America, the CCCA, they maintain a list of eligible unmodified cars that are called classic. So there is actually an organization in the world that does this.
Yeah, I mean, we did do the icon episode a while back, and I think it's important to kind of differentiate between the icons episode, which we spoke about, fan favorite cars within the South African context. So I'm glad that we now get to unpack some of potential future classic cars that exist today.
Well, I mean, as we get into the episode, you'll notice that, some of those very sought after cars were actually only produced in South Africa.
Yeah, there's a few of them that we spotlighted in the icons episode. The Superbus, for instance, which, is a loved vehicle in the South African market. And it's definitely going to be a classic in South Africa, at least. And, we're speaking to another lover of classic cars, Chad. He was just talking about how globally it's a loved car. So, yeah, the South African automotive car culture definitely produces lots of classic cars.
Well, let's get right into it. Do you think the Golf GTI will become a classic car?
So this one is kind of debatable, depending on who you ask. I think of Golf GTIs as vehicles that are similar to what pop art is. Pop art.
What do you mean
became
pop art?
Classic. Pop, like as in Andy Warhol pop art, sort of. A lot of people thought it was just commercialization of a vehicle, but people started to appreciate them over time. And I think the GTI is a vehicle which South Africans have appreciated a lot. And with the advent of EVs coming along, I think that GTI, specifically the last few ones, are going to be classic cars. Some might say no, but I definitely consider them.
Well, Chad has a very interesting definition of for the GTI, and it's not what you might think. I'm not going to repeat it here because it's it's not repeatable on a show like this. But everybody and anybody has a GTI, so how can that become a classic? It's not rare.
It's not rare, but people love it, and I think with the whole EV. We know that VW is moving the GTI line into the EV space, and specifically the last few ones that we have now will be rare cars. We've already seen on AutoTrader that some of the latest GTIs have appreciated in price. And I think that is an indication that a car is becoming a classic or is going to be a collector's item.
What, that it appreciates in price?
That it's starting to appreciate in price before the end of its run. It's not just demand, but rather demand because of the end of an era. So yeah, that's what I consider a real classic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know so much about the GTI, but it remains to be seen. Let's see where it goes. Maybe the GTI will become the eGTI. Who knows? And then the last GTI will be a classic. I mean, I don't think every GTI will become a classic. Maybe if they make something special as the last production ice run, that could become a classic. But if it's just a normal run-of-the-mill GTI, I doubt it will become a classic. Hey? They've got to do something special with the car in its last production run.
100%. But I mean, let's take the Model 3, for instance. Not the Model 3, the Ford T model.
Model
T. The first production car. The Model T. The Model T Ford, yeah. I mean, that was that wasn't supposed to become a classic car, but
it's not a classic. It's an antique, eh?
An antique, vintage car, and
it is.
I'm just saying. I'm just using your own definition. It may become in 50 years. You never know, George. You never know.
You never know. But I think it's got to be something special in terms of its last production run. Let's talk about V8s. We said V8s right in the beginning. Which V8s do you think are going to become classics?
There's many which are already classics. But kind of to what you alluded to, the last few V8s are going to be the more popular ones, specifically naturally aspirated V8s, are cars which are already starting to die. Ironically, my favorite engine is a bi-turbo V8, Mercedes-Benz's bi-turbo V8s. And, it's because of the sound why I love that engine so much, and why I've always been looking, I'm always an AutoTrader looking to see if I can get my hands on one. But to your point, it's kind of the last naturally aspirated V8s, which are pretty much all going to be classic sought after vehicles. You're already seeing it now.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that kind of like unpacks the V8s. I still think that the last of the V8s in terms of cars like the SRT, I don't know about the Ford Mustang so much, the latest Ford Mustang. It's just that car does not inspire me, that V8.
No. It's lost hearts. It's lost hearts, and it's not efficient. It's, before the first few V8s, I'm talking about, Eleanor and some of the iconic ones, they gave people a feeling. It wasn't just, a machine where they stuck a big engine inside. It was more than that. And I think, I agree with you. The latest ones just don't inspire much.
Yeah. All right. Electric cars. Where do you think the classic cars?
I want to ask you that.
You want to ask me that?
I want to ask you that. I want to ask you that because I think you're the biggest advocates of electric cars. Do you think electric cars, specifically the ones we have now, or some of the early ones, are going to become classics?
Yeah, maybe the very early ones with, the very first electric cars, and I mean, don't shoot me for this, but I just don't think the Prius. I mean, Prius is a hybrid. Nissan Leaf, I don't think that will become a classic car either. But maybe some of the very first electric cars, and maybe they won't, because it's not as inspiring, I suppose, as a V8, or inspiring as something that is mechanically a marvel of engineering. Because I think that's a lot of the classic cars are marvels of engineering. The Model T Ford, one of the first engineering versions of a car, and maybe the electric car won't become classics. But people will start to collect them at some point when ICE vehicles fade. So maybe people will be, after the very first ones that might have analog dials as an example, because most electric vehicles have screens and all that stuff. And do any have analog dials? Do they have analog, tactile buttons? Those could become classic things that don't exist in the future, and something that somebody's after.
I agree with you. It's kind of a thinker.
Yeah.
I think classic does not necessarily mean first.
Yeah.
So I agree. I think it's going to be kind of interesting to see, because ultimately we're going to be seeing a lot of electric cars. And that doesn't, that kind of removes its classicness, if that makes sense, and its collectability.
Classicness.
So I agree.
Classicness. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the M cars. I think all of the M cars are going to become classics.
100%. Specifically, you speaking about BMW, right? Those M cars. Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think every single M car is going to become a classic car. My favorite car in the entire world is the BMW M2.
Why the M2 and not the M3?
It's my favorite driver car. I think it for me at least, it covers every single base of what an M car is supposed to be. It's fun. It's nimble. The handling is insane. It's just the ultimate sort of expression of what M is supposed to be, sheer driving pleasure. So the M2 for me is just top of the list for me.
I think that the M3 is going to become the classic car. And the reason is because it was one of the first M's. Yeah.
I mean, ask any South African, they'll tell you the same thing. It's such an iconic model. It's always going to be popular here, but is the greatest M3 that's ever going to exist already produced? That's a question that a lot of car fans are asking themselves, is, you already have the best M car now? And I think a lot of people are going to be, starting to start collecting them because the previous ones are collectors now. They appreciate it in time. So
I don't see that. I don't see the.
I agree.
I don't see the M2 in that history.
No, that's just a very personal thing to me. It's a classic in my books. It's always going to be the greatest M car that was ever produced. So for me,
but maybe when ICE vehicles fade, all the M vehicles, all the last of the M vehicles will be classics and collectibles.
We can only hope.
We can only hope. All right, and then very lastly, let's get on to Japanese domestic market cars. So the classic drift car, the Corolla RX-7. That I think it's already a collector's classic car.
100%. I think for a lot of people, that's where the love of cars come from, is JDMs. And it's very important to understand that JDMs is not every single Japanese car. It's specifically an imported Japanese car, sports car, that is. And they are, you watch Fast and Furious as a child, or you watch, Initial D, and you see these JDM cars drifting. And they inspire kids, and they make you love vehicles from a very young age. So they become very popular. And also they banned in America. I think it's 25 years after production, you can only bring them in. So the demand is there, and they fund cars which have inspired people.
The demand is there because they've cut off the supply, what sorts of JDM cars were in South Africa, and what kinds of classics would you see in South Africa?
So my favorite JDM cars is you mentioned it, is the RX-7. It has been in South Africa, and they're super awesome cars. There's so much you can do with them in terms of personalizing them and making them your own. And you can, turn the power up to 1,000 if you want. So that's 1,000. Kind of my favorite South African.
And I suppose the Silica and the JDM and the GTRs, those are popular JDM cars. So let's see. I mean, it's anybody's guess what might happen in the future. So talking about classic cars, let's bring in none other than our very own Chad Lückhoff, our expert journalist Chad, who will be reviewing the 2021 Ford Mustang Mach 1. Now, we've been talking about classic cars, and we'll ask Chad to give us his opinion of the Golf GTI that we were talking about a little bit earlier, without referring to the real words that he was using before the show, because this is a family show. But we were arguing earlier, Chad. Welcome to the show again. Nice to have you. We were arguing earlier on about whether the GTI will become a classic car, and you said that everybody and their cousin has one, and that's the reason they won't become classics. Give us your rundown of why the GTI won't become a classic.
I don't think it's going to become a classic to the extent that you're labeling classic cars here. And I just think it is. It's largely due to the popularity and the volume of sales. And that's clearly seen now with the new Golf 8. South Africa is only going to be getting the GTI. We're not going to get a regular 2-liter. We're not going to get a 1.4. We're only getting GTI because that's the only model that sells. If you see a Golf 8, it's going to be a GTI. When last did you see a non-GTI Golf 7?
It's a good point.
That is something that is rare.
It's a good point.
That is something that you actually take note of. Regular GTIs and the likes, sadly, no. Listen, it's a great car. It's a fantastic all-rounder, but they just sold in such volume that I don't think it's going to be heralded as being classic.
Well, we have this recording, so we'll come back to this in 10 years' time, and then we'll see, Chad. We'll see.
Sure. But I think Chad's got a good point.
I'll put money on it.
The volumes are where in a lot of instances, and we see this with the JDM cars that we just spoke about. When there's a limited supply, that plays more into the classic than when there are too many of them. And I must agree with Chad. Everybody and their cat has a GTI.
It plays to their desirability. Listen, they're desirable cars, but the South African culture, I think, is skewed it. So locally, it's definitely not going to have the same sort of cult-like status. There will be, there's a caveat there that I'm going to say possibly things like the TCR. TCR was just a cosmetic upgrade, but things like Club Sport and Club Sport S, for me, that is something that still turns my head. When I see a club sport, I'm not a GTI, I'm not a Golf fan by any stretch of the imagination. I can praise its strong points, but it's not so much the car, it's the fan club that I can't stand. Okay. But I will still turn my head when it comes to a club sport or a club sport S, because I know how good a car it is, and because it was limited edition. But mechanically it was slightly different to the others, and that makes it stand out. That makes it jump off the page.
Exactly.
On behalf of AutoTrader, I'd like to apologize to all the GTI fans.
No apologies from my side.
What you know what we're agnostic when it comes to that, so that's fine, Chad, don't stress about it. But we're not here to talk about GTIs, we're here to talk about the 2021 Ford Mustang Mach 1. All right, so this was a classic car, not this particular one, but Ford Mustang as a brand was a classic car back in the 1960s, made popular and got its fame through movies, particularly. And so tell us a little bit about the history of the Mustang, very, very briefly, and then tell us about this car.
So Ford Mustang, as we know, released in 1964, midway through 1964. The first production year model was officially 1965, but you get 1964.5 models, which was that 6 months before it became official that they were selling vehicles. Those are probably the rarest ones. But the Mustang was designed to be a sporty V8 powered coupe that the blue collar man on the street could afford to buy. So it was affordable V8 coupe sports car, and what they regarded as sports car at the time, ownership, and it made it accessible. And that's what made the Mustang so endearing. It's now in its 6th generation. This is now S550 is the code name for this one, launched in 2015 locally. It's proven to be rather popular. Since 2015, they've sold over 3,800 units of Ford Mustang locally, which is rather surprising when you consider that it is a slightly higher end, more expensive vehicle. It is a rather niche model, let's put it that way. It is a coupe, generally V8s. They've dropped the 2.3 litre EcoBoost from the local lineup once again, like with the Golf. They realized that customers are gravitating only towards the V8. So let's offer them the V8, and there's no point in offering them the 2.3 EcoBoost, the 4-cylinder engine. This, in 1969, the Mustang Mach 1 came out, and it was sort of Ford steering into the slide, steering into the skid, realizing that people were racing their cars. They were going out, hiring the vehicles, racing them over the weekend, and then returning them on Monday. And they were sort of steering into the skid, saying, okay, well, listen, if you're wanting to race these cars, let's build a vehicle that's a little more suited to racing or autocross or gymkhana style activities. And they developed the Mach 1, which had some power upgrades, some transmission upgrades, and mainly suspension and braking upgrades. And 2021 Mustang Mach 1 does much the same. It's an homage to the 1969 Mach 1, and it sees largely the same. There's a little bit of a power hike, but it's largely suspension, braking, cooling, a few little tweaks on it just to make it a little bit better and a little more exclusive.
Well, so if you have just a normal 5 liter, if you're in the line of buying a Mustang, is this the one that you want, or do you want potentially the Bullet, or just a normal one? You just get some sort of tune.
So asking me is rather strange, because I have a particular set of things that I look for in a vehicle. I do like the Bullet Mustang. The Mach 1 has the same engine modifications as the Bullet. It makes the same 338 kilowatt power output, as well as 454 horsepower. If we're speaking about Mustang, we have to use horsepower. We can't really use kilowatts now, can we? It's such
kilowatts,
it's such a British thing. But it has similar sort of tweaks. It's very similar to the Bullet. All 50 versions of the Bullet that came into South Africa were manual, and only 15 of the 90 Mach 1s that came into South Africa were manual. And driving a big 5 liter high revving V8 with a manual gearbox sending drive to the rear wheels is something special. Sadly, it is something that kids today will not experience. Youngsters today in the motoring world, anybody born after 2000 is probably not going to experience it. It's just not the way that the motoring world is going.
They're not going to know how to gear shift, right?
As well, yes. I mean, if they're even interested in cars,
exactly.
Ride sharing and the likes is just putting a real hamper on vehicles like these that have a tangible, organic sort of experience to it. And it's a little bit upsetting, but I'm glad that I'm here for this transition in motoring and that I have managed to experience it as well. The Mach 1 would be the sort of vehicle that I would possibly go for in a manual guise. I do like the styling. I like the tweaks. I like the changes that they've made to it. If you're looking for one to use every day, you're probably going to gravitate towards the automatic. But that unfortunately just dilutes all the changes that they've made to the vehicle to make it a better sort of track car. So then I feel that you may as well just go with a regular 5-liter GT with that 10-speed auto. You're really not going to reap the benefit and the rewards of all the changes they've made. So why pay the premium? Just go out and get one of the regular GTs.
Well, I mean, I must say, I was not a fan of the new Mustang when it did launch. And I think it's because I got to drive the, 2-liter turbo.
2.3
EcoBoost turbo, yes, that one. And for me, it was trying to be a Mustang, and it wasn't. And I must say, this Mach 1 is now I haven't driven it, so I can't really say. You've driven it, but for me, it's seemingly, with its body styling, with what they've done with it, it kind of resembles the 1960s version, just in a kind of 21st century guise. Am I reading it right?
Absolutely. When they designed the sixth generation, they labored over the original fastback. So the Series 1, the 1965 fastback, they labored over it. And let's go with 69 with this one. They were prepared to sacrifice the passenger compartment, the rear passenger headroom. And indeed they did, just to get the proportions right, to get the rake on the rear window right, to be able to place the wheels in the right place so that it has that proper look. It was facelifted in 2019, and it's still retains a lot of that. It just had a few little styling tweaks. It was largely a tech upgrade, but I think it is definitely the closest that you're going to get to the original iconic first generation Ford Mustang fastback with creature comforts and modern day safety.
Lovely, lovely stuff. I'm so glad that they've done this, because for me, Mustang was losing its appeal, and now it's fine. It's kind of like I want to see more of this car. I think it's getting its appeal back, and maybe this will become the next classic from the 21st century. Who knows? So Chad, what does this car retail for?
So you can't buy one of these new off the floor. All 90 models are spoken for and sold. And yes, George put into that, only 90 models brought into the country. So there's a bit of desirability factor here. And yes, you could see this being sort of future classic. So I'm inclined to agree with that. The regular 5-liter GT, to a lesser extent, there's been enough of them sold for them to be rather commonplace, just playing to our classic theme here.
GTI.
The Bullet anniversary editions, those are going to be the ones that are going to become a little more halo. When they launched, they were going for just over 1.2. Some reports say just under 1.2, and some said just over. What I do know is that there are a few dealerships that actually have these on their floors. So undoubtedly, customers bought them with knowing that there's going to be high demand and they could sell it for 100,000 rands profit or so. So you are going to find them for as little as 1.3 million rand on AutoTrader. You can also find them for about 1.6, 1.7 million rand, but that's with delivery mileage on it. So it's virtually a brand new vehicle.
Exactly, and I suppose therein lies the thing about appreciating cars. When there's low supply, high demand, the car's going to go up in value. So you probably can buy one of these, but you're going to buy it for a lot more than 1.2 million rand, as Chad says. So Chad, out of 10, very finally, what would you score the Ford Mustang Mach 1?
I really enjoyed driving it. Every time I climbed into it, it was an occasion. My neighbors hated me. At V8, cold start in the morning. I'm not popular here in the neighborhood. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to sample the 6-speed manual version, which I've sampled in the Bullet, so I know it's largely one and the same. I had the 10-speed automatic version, and that unfortunately soured it. And for that reason, I'm going to have to mark it down and give just a 7.5.
So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. 7.5 out of 10 for the Mach 1 Ford Mustang, the 2021 model. But bear in mind that has a caveat, and that's because Chad got to drive the automatic version. If he had to drive the manual version, I'm pretty sure that score would have been slightly higher. So thank you very much for joining Chad, our expert journalist, Chad Lückhoff. If you want to go and see any of his reviews, go on to autotrader.co.za and go to the news and reviews section, and you will see Chad's reviews of many cars, particularly his video reviews, and get some expert opinion before you buy your next Ford Mustang, and go and see what he thinks, and definitely buy a manual version. That's his opinion. It's a classic driver's car. So thank you very much, Chad. Nice to have you again, and we will see you next time.
Lovely. Thank you very much, guys. You guys have a great show.
Cheers.
Thanks, Chad.
So what do you think, Wandile, Ford Mustang 2021?
7.5. I mean, it's a fitting place. If we consider the leaderboard, the only other V8 above it is the Mercedes-Benz E63S. And I think it's, 7.5 is pretty where I thought it would be. It seems exciting.
Very good. Well, let's get into everyday people send AutoTrader and motoring related questions about all things car buying and selling. Now, Wandile and I will attempt to answer some of these burning questions. What's the first question, Wandile?
First question comes from Eugene, who's asked, my Peugeot 206 is heavier on fuel at the coast than it is at the reef. Moved from Johannesburg to Cape Town. Any advice?
Well, fuel consumption changed when you moved down to the coast. Could be explained, Eugene, by the higher air density, which allows more air to enter the car's engine, and feeding it with petrol to match the higher oxygen content. It could be also a case that you're a little bit heavier on the throttle because you have a little bit more power, because air density plus more fuel means more power, which means we tend to be a little bit heavier with our foot. So, maybe the thing that you're actually doing is putting your foot down a little bit more because you've got more power, because when there's more power, you tend to use that power. I do it with my iPace. It's very tempting to put your foot down. Very tempting. So maybe just watch how you use that foot. Anyway, next question, Wandile.
Next question comes from B Rats, who's asked, vehicle mainly for game viewing once a month. So this is kind of a long-winded one, but essentially B Rats has a house in nature reserve. They have a budget of 60 to 70,000 Rand. They're looking for a vehicle which they can kind of use off-roading. The other requirements is that the parts need to be readily available. Basic maintenance needs to be, as low as possible. Petrol consumption is not too much of an issue, and they have noted that there's limited mechanics in the area. What car do we suggest? I suppose the car to consider here is the D21 generation Nissan Sani 2.4 or V6, which is got a lot of roomy space inside. It is rugged, but don't forget the Toyota. Any kind of like Toyota is there should be parts everywhere in Africa with Toyota, so don't discount the Toyota, especially the things like the Land Cruisers and the open top, or should I say open back Land Cruisers. So maybe go for one of those, maybe a Hyundai Tucson. Yeah, definitely. I think just an additional note there's you may want to increase your budget to save you long-term costs because the budget's kind of low. So you can find a very high mileage vehicle.
You're not going to find a low mileage Toyota with that kind of budget.
Yeah. Okay.
You could go for the BMW X3 or the Volvo XC90, but you're going to have to increase your budget to go for those.
Noted. Last question comes from Luyanda, who's asked, do you buy cars? Very simple.
AutoTrader doesn't buy cars. AutoTrader is an independent marketplace that links the buyers and sellers of cars. However, We do have a sellers platform, and we've got 3 products on that platform. The first is Sell It Yourself, where you come onto the platform, you list your car, and you do all of the vetting, you do all of the viewings, and you do all of the paperwork yourself. And we provide the advertising platform for you. And then we've got a second product called Sell It For Me, which is effectively us helping you sell the car. We handle the entire process for you: the appointments, the viewing of the car. We'll even provide you space at our offices to meet with the buyer. And we'll help you with the paperwork. And then we've got a third product, which is let your car be sold to all of the dealers on our network, which you can also take advantage of. And so those are the 3 ways in which you can sell your car on AutoTrader. But unfortunately, AutoTrader doesn't specifically buy cars. That's all we have time for, ladies and gentlemen, and it's been epic. My name is George Mienie, and as usual, being joined by Wandile Sishi. See you next time.
Start with AutoTrader.